Alright, I was actually gonna put this in a video a while back and I just kept forgetting. So I just want to just add it in here, another Nebraska thing. So on that first game, the Nebraska BYU game, they made a big deal about Dwayne Wade being at the game, the Miami Heat player. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But anyway, he's married to Gabrielle Union, kind of like the Union Army. So I thought I wasn't for sure about Nebraska if they were like con, like a Confederate state. They weren't a state, obviously, but they were a territory. But anyway, I guess I'll just pull it up here. You read a little bit about Nebraska and the Civil War, and they were still a territory, not a state. We've been talking about the number 58 and 85 like crazy. Even I noticed Ulysses S. Grant. Let's check out him really quick. He died in the year 1885 even. So just wanted to point that out really quick. Also, the word territory, territory in Pythagorean gematria, 58. Nebraska was still a territory. Anyway, I guess Gabrielle Union is actually originally from Omaha, Nebraska, and she's actually a huge Husker fan. So it even tells you in here. So that would be why she took Dwayne Wade to the game. And I believe, I'm not going to pull up the article, but I believe that it was the first time that he'd ever been to a Nebraska Cornhusker football game. But anyway, also, she's 42 years old. We talk about 42 a decent amount. It's around black people or whatever. But also in Gematria, 42. And I guess it's the secret or the key to the world or whatever in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Lots of stuff with 42, but just check it out. If you do 42 in Gematria, it's 43. So 42 is literally a coded 43. So I just found that pretty interesting. And check out Gabrielle Union's name in Gematria. 144. Just like the day Lincoln was shot. Tons of stuff with 144. Mentioned it in previous videos, not even gonna say it, so anyway, let's check out Dwayne Wade then. Dwayne Wade. Just making sure I spell it right. 105. I talked about that a little bit. Blood Moon adds up to 105. Also 42. Interesting. He's actually a junior though. He's actually Dwayne Wade Jr. So I'd put in junior as well. Becomes a 52. That goes along with the 144. Talked about it so many times. I feel bad, but it's just so hard to keep re-explaining. So anyway, also it adds to 133. Just talked about this a billion times. If you do it as a date, it's the same day that Pope Francis became the Pope. And Dwayne Wade plays for the Miami Heat. And that sort of ties in with LeBron James and Trainwreck and everything else. Also, Nebraska just played Miami Hurricanes, whatever. But anyway, Miami Heat, 43. He's even 33 years old right now, number 3, and age of 33. So could be a 333 that we've been talking about, how it's been coded to Philadelphia. Um, yeah, because Philadelphia will be 333 years old this year, 33 days before the 333rd day of the year, on October 27th, which is the same day of Back to the Future, when the time machine gets destroyed by the train or whatever. It all ties back to that. So while I'm on it, I can't remember if I talked about this. Miami Hurricanes actually adds up to, in simple gematria, 161. I've talked about that number a ton because it's the mirror of 61 and 16. Let's see here. I'll just type it in really quick. 161. It adds up to 239, like the 923 stuff we've been talking about. Also, it adds up to 95 in Pythagorean. And that's interesting because today in the game, I never mentioned it in the previous video, but they did talk about the number 95 multiple times. It was even 95 degrees, and they mentioned that multiple times because of the weather, and Nebraska was playing whatever. They talked about them being in the air condition and the temperature was 95. There was like 4 or 5 other times they mentioned 95 that like really didn't have anything to do with anything. So just kind of interesting. Another thing I forgot to point out was it's pretty interesting. I've talked about pretty much Michigan and Nebraska, and like the coding around these two teams. Michigan because of Lupercalia and the Wolf and Harbaugh and Tom Brady and just all kinds of stuff with it. I mean, but kind of weird that Michigan plays BYU on the same day that Nebraska plays Southern Mississippi. And I've talked about all the coding to this stuff. And then now Michigan plays BYU and like all Nebraska. That was a big game. The Hail Mary, whatever, everything else. Tons of 12 in it. Tons of 34, 43. Also 30, 33. But BYU in Gematria is 12. And it reminds me of in 1997 when Michigan and Nebraska had to split the championship. Even though Michigan went into the last game, they were number 1, and Nebraska was number 2, and Michigan won their bowl game, the Rose Bowl, and then Nebraska won their bowl game, and then it was divided into 2 polls, and one of them said Michigan was number 1, and the other one said Nebraska was number 1, so they had to split the national championship. And that was they played their bowl games in January 1st and January 2nd of 1998. That's 17 years ago. So that goes along with the Moses coding again. Like the Moses is 71 and 17, and I've talked about all that before. And I remember in 2005 or the 2005 Alamo Bowl, Michigan and Nebraska played again in a bowl game, and it was kind of like the defining game or whatever. Like who's better, who should have won the championship, even though it had nothing to do with 1997. That's how they kind of perceived it in the media and just whatever. But I know even the score is 32-28, which adds up to 60. And 60 has been a super coded number as of the last like noticeably at least as of the last like couple weeks now. Like Moses Malone was 60 when he died. Tons of 60 stuff. But even just reading through here, I mean, I remember watching this, but I don't, I never looked that in detail at the time. Like the first scorer was like on a 52-yard pass. Even talks about at the very end there was like Michigan kept throwing the ball back. I don't even know what it's called. They talk about it here, the Cal Stanford band play. The video of it's here. Like basically there was no time left, so they threw a pass and then they kind of just kept throwing backward passes to each other until they could go all the way down the field. But what happened is it gets way down here, and then Tyler Ecker gets the ball, number 89, and he runs it for 60 yards. It says out here, and then he gets pushed out of bounds, and like he almost scores, and Michigan almost wins. And the big deal was that Nebraska coaches or whatever came out onto the field, and there should have been a flag, and there wasn't, and so it was a big controversy, like who really won the game. Nebraska cheated, blah blah blah. All part of the WWE like storyline they got to throw in there. So just want to point out it is a 60. Yeah, he ran it for 60 yards. It says somewhere down here, approximately 60 yards to the Nebraska 16-yard line, and then he got pushed out by this guy. But his name was Tyler Ecker. So I wanted to check his name out in Gematria. Tyler Ecker. 122. I mean, what are the odds of that? So then they never played again until Nebraska joined the Big Ten. And the first time they played was in 2011. And Michigan won 45-17. Just want to show that. It was on November 19th of 2011. And then Michigan lost the next year. And I've talked about how a lot of this, I feel like it stems back to 2012. Because Abe Lincoln's birthday, whatever, is 2/12, the 43rd day of the year. So 2012, if you take out the 0, it's 2/12. And Nebraska won this year, but look at the score. They were 23-9, like the 9-23. I mean, they didn't have that on any of these other games. The score was not that. So kind of interesting to me, I guess. The only time they have that score is against Michigan. It was also on October 27th, like the Back to the Future Day. Also, another interesting thing, if you add up Nebraska Cornhuskers and Michigan Wolverines, Nebraska Cornhuskers, Michigan Wolverines, 176, just like Back to the Future. So, there's a ton of other stuff with this number, but just pointing that out is on the last day that, where Back to the Future ends in the part 3 or whatever. And yeah, so pointing it out. So Michigan's record, Michigan and Nebraska have only played 8 times ever, and Nebraska's actually losing 3, 4, and 1 or whatever. So Michigan has won 4 games and Nebraska has won 3, and then there was a tie. But interesting, out of them 8, one of them was the 1986 Fiesta Bowl when Michigan had Jim Harbaugh, their coach, that I talked about, all the stuff with him, like the reason that he's back at Michigan and sacrifice of the wolf and whatnot, Lupercalia. But so pretty interesting. It was also the 1985 season. So the Back to the Future Day was actually 66 days before that, or 2 months, 5 days, like the 25. I talked about the 25 and the S exception being 34. It's also the mirror of 52. So who knows? Just wanted to point that out. They actually don't play this year, and they didn't play last year either. Anyway, I haven't really looked that much into that. I'm sure there might be some more to it. Wanted to point it out really quick. And then also in this Nebraska and the American Civil War, it talks about how they were mostly sided with the Union. And then I said the Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade went to the game, and it was a big deal. But it's Union. But you read down here, and it talks about the people in the Nebraska Army. It says 35 Nebraskans were killed in action during the war, while another 204 died of other causes, including disease and accident. Well, 35 plus 204 is the 239 again. So another 923, 239, dealing with Nebraska and the Civil War. I guess last thing I just want to point out is I talked about how I don't know if it's necessarily about Nebraska or Lincoln, because it could just be foreshadowing Philadelphia again. I mean, it's all foreshadowing the Civil War type theme they've been running in the media and whatnot, but also a lot of it stems back to Pope Francis's visit. But Nebraska, on this day that I'm talking about, when Pope Francis, it'll be the first day that he's in Philadelphia, Nebraska plays Southern Mississippi, but they're called the Golden Eagles. So then I think of the Philadelphia Eagles and just a Golden Eagles, so who knows? Abraham Lincoln was shot with a gun called the Philadelphia Derringer, so that's also another Philadelphia reference. So maybe it's just, I really think it might just be foreshadowing a blackout of some sort, or just the assassination of the Pope, or Obama, one or the other. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to it. Also, just want to point out a few more things about the Moses stuff. So Moses Malone died. Charles Barkley talks about how he always called him Dad, because he went to the Philadelphia 76ers, and Moses Malone kind of took him under his wing or whatever. But at the eulogy Charles Barkley gave, he says that he hasn't called Moses Malone Moses since 1985. And then also he tells the family, you guys know what it's like to have a father. He was never my father, and he emphasizes that. And then he says that he was my dad or whatever. And look at the gematria of father. Father is 58, of course. Also, on a side note, I thought back to the NBA Finals, and remember Andre Iguodala, who came in. He was number 9 and started guarding number 23, LeBron James. And then they won, and he was the MVP even. Andre Iguodala, 58. Also, another random Moses. I have no idea why I thought of this song. I just typed it in, and it's called Amos Moses. It's by this guy. And look, the guy died at the age of 71. Just thought that was funny. Like, it was so random, but, yeah, who knows. Just gonna end it there, run out of time, and just wanted to throw in some extra stuff that I forgot to put in at some point in time. So, whatever, have a good night.